So this coffee is actually quite gassy. Let me just show you guys. If you guys don't remember, this is my new honey processed El Salvador. The color is nice and red to show the naturals. But then you can see from the beans itself, they're not very dark roast. It's quite a light roast. I have this one a little bit darker than the last test batch. This is at about 16.4% weight loss, which puts it in the medium range. I think the medium makes it taste quite a bit better. If you guys are wondering, this will be one of the coffees featured in the new Ugly Coffees. Okay, so go and buy that right now. But let me just show you guys what happens when you have a gassy coffee, even though it is a light roast. Actually, the roast profile doesn't really matter. If you pour down the middle, and you can see that the gases are kind of shaping up quite nicely, what happens is if you were to just do a faster pour, or actually I think this is a pretty average speed, but let's just do a single pour all the way to the end. Or even if you don't, let's just do 240 right now. And you were to stir. If you look carefully, you can see that there's still a lot of like floating particles up here. It's just under agitated. It's not being able to sink, so water is not passing through it. If the water doesn't pass through it, you're not actually extracting from it. You're going to see that along the walls, there's going to be some grinds there. These are just under extracted grinds. There's not a lot of flavor. So what would happen is the beginning of this brew inside here is going to be very watery. It doesn't have as much flavor as you would like. And then we'll just do another pour. And because we're just trying to target what's floating up, we want to pour a little bit slower, but we want to pour down the sides to get everything that hasn't been extracted. And you're going to give it another stir, and we'll take a look at it again. So now it's done brewing, you can just take a quick look. You can see that there's a lot of muddiness over here, but then in the middle as well, it's very granular. So normally when I do the single pour and I stir a lot more, the fines move to the sides. Now that we've cut it back into the middle, we've over extracted this and then under extracted the larger particles. This is also ground on the finer side, so this is a little bit harder to accomplish. It just shows that the gases kind of stop the coffee from extracting or being penetrated through. Therefore, you're not going to have as even of extractions. Let me show you guys kind of on the AeroPress how this translates in a different kind of view. Switching to an AeroPress's point of view, we're just going to dump some water in there, and we're going to watch what happens. I'm going to go until the line. See that there's a lot of bubbling. When you pour really quickly, what happens is the bottom doesn't actually get to be agitated quite as well, whereas the top is, you can see there's a huge divide. There's a lot of gases up here, and there's the water here, and then there's this that's trying to go to the top. So this is more predominant during gassier coffees. This is kind of what it looks like from the top. You can see there's a lot of gases. And what we're going to do now is we're going to give it a quick stir. Now, you can see once I've stirred, a lot of the gases, or a lot of the grinds from the bottom have already moved to the top. But there's a lot of trapped gases here. This is like what we would call a crema inside the espresso. And when you do a second pour, actually, let me show you guys from the top. So when you do a second pour, a lot of the gases kind of get released. And the puck has started to kind of just move down already. Now in pour overs, this is actually really important because you can see when you pour too quickly that a lot of things get stuck at the bottom. They stay dry. With a pour over, it can actually move through the filter paper and it causes a lot of side channeling. Now, in the AeroPress, obviously, because I'm doing from the inverted side, it's not going to be as noticeable. But it's kind of cool to see. Also, when I talk a lot about like the gases, the releasing of gases, the way the grinds sink, I think it's actually very important to know because then we know how the grinds react with the water better. Obviously, the V60 is not the AeroPress, so they don't actually work the same. But in the AeroPress, let me just, if I stir again, right? If you know your coffee's done brewing, if there's no further gases being released. I think that's like the most important thing that we need to know, is that the gases do more or less represent how extracted your coffee is. Water actually has to pass through the coffee for it to quote unquote extract, okay? That's why in something like pour overs, when the grinds sink already, you're just over extracting what's floated to the top. That's why there was muddiness in the second brew, because we pulled it from the sides. Even though I stirred again, those fines sink a lot faster than I am able to push it to the sides, which over extracts them. In return, we're going to have these other particles that are underneath that aren't going to be extracted as much, and therefore you have this imbalance of over extraction, under extraction that occurs a lot more in something like the V60. With this coffee, because it has more gases, it is much more difficult to kind of get all the grinds to release at a similar time. And you saw in the AeroPress that there's going to be a huge difference in timing if you pour quickly between the top and the bottom. That's why you have to set a deeper divot for gassier coffees, so you can start at the bottom and lift your coffees upwards. If you have kind of like a lighter roast that doesn't have as much gases, you don't want to have that, because the gas actually pushes the water upwards, and when it pushes the water upwards, it doesn't actually flow quite as quickly down. Now, but in a V60, if you have a too deep of a divot, then you're just pouring straight down the middle. So once you have the divot, you have to tap to kind of create almost like a seal to force the water to stay up, just like you saw in the AeroPress. So I think this is a really cool tip, and I'm finally able to show it through the AeroPress. And it's just nice to know, how we're brewing the coffees. As for flavor wise, I always talk about, before we get into flavors, I always talk about how a good extraction is actually just an even extraction. I don't want to over extract one part and under extract the other. In terms of kind of like seeing how much your TDS is, if you over extracted just the top and not the bottom, you could still have a very high TDS, but that TDS doesn't represent good flavors. I think if you have a high TDS where everything is evenly extracted, it will always taste good. A very good example is kind of like looking at the probe of a thermometer when you have it in a steak. But if you never flip the steak, eventually that probe will hit what you would consider medium rare, but one side will be overcooked and one side will be undercooked. Now, it's not necessarily the same in coffee, but you can kind of get the idea what happens when you over extract something and then you under extract something. And then all you do is look at the numbers and judge how extracted, quote unquote, your coffee is based on these, I guess, numbers that I would call them just manipulated, okay? Anyways, flavor-wise, I think having a fully extracted coffee is my favorite way of having a coffee. I think it has bolder flavors, richer flavors, and it's much more sweet and balanced. Sometimes when you have too much acidity, it could be from over-extracting the fines, because they tend to have a bit more of the acidic flavors, and that just brings out this kind of like almost like stomach acid kind of taste to it. Not I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think when you push it that far, you could have that along with a little kind of like bready nuttiness. And I think those flavors are not always the best tasting. And if you have a really well-balanced coffee, it tastes round on your tongue. It doesn't taste sharp in either direction. Even the funkier coffees that naturally have that, you just get this kind of richness that comes out. So yeah, anyways, I hope this video wasn't too long. I tried to condense it and keep everything together. So yeah, let me know how you guys like this. Also, this coffee tastes great. I figured out how to roast it. It's got a lot more sweetness to it now. I have a kind of like a lower start temperature because I needed more time at the bottom. It had this like vegetal taste. So I dropped it at 170. And then I sped it up in the middle and I slowed it down at the end even further. And I finished at a slightly higher temperature. We're finishing at 202.5 now, which leads us to a 16.4% weight loss. And that puts us straight into the very bottom of the medium roast section. So I'm going to talk about how weight percentage is a very good indicator versus, I guess, some people use color. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.